American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
I believe the president made the correct decision. To be honest with you, I think we were mostly excited about it. Most people join the Marine Corps because they want to go to the fight.
It could last, 6 days, 6 weeks. I doubt 6 months.
I don't want to say it was arrogance, but it's just an overwhelming sense of confidence that we would be able to take them down pretty easy.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Suppressing resistance is one thing, consolidating control is quite another. US-led forces are about to face what was always going to be the greatest challenge of this war, shifting from invaders to occupiers.
They were in the wrong, and we did what we had to do to make sure that we all got to come home, live out the rest of our lives. I don't lose any sleep over it. I'm cool with it.
I think if we killed 3 civilians, that's pretty bad, and it's happened before.
That was 5 years ago, when US troops invaded this country, buoyed by national enthusiasm and fervent hopes for a quick campaign welcomed by the Iraqi people. For the young Marines I was embedded with back then, it was their first experience of war. Now, after the deaths of more than 4,000 troops and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, America's attitude to the invasion have changed. And so have the men who led it.
Together, a little louder. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. United States Marine Corps.
Back in 2003, we met Sergeant Gomez when he was just 23, and second in charge of the war's first big supply convoy to cross the border from Kuwait into Iraq.
I think it's pretty good. I think we're moving pretty fast.
It was here Sergeant Gomez and the young Marines he led got their first taste of war and death. Just some of the civilians who got in the way of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
It kind of feels disturbing, First time I seen something like this. It's pretty gruesome. It almost sounds messed up to say. At the same time, it feels kind of motivating seeing something like this.
Whoever it was that did this must have felt threatened.
That's actually when it sunk in. When you seen the first 2 Iraqis that were down.
5 years after he first went to war, Sergeant Gomez is now a recruiter.
An artillery combat specialist.
I think the recruiters these days have to work a little bit harder. If it was like 2003, 2004 time frame, you probably still have the more motivated people who, remember September 11th and kind of want to defend their country. And now you're talking 5 years later, it's like, wow, it's still going on. So it's like, well, why would I want to sign up and go to Iraq?
It's Careers Day at Richards High School in suburban Chicago. While Sergeant Gomez plays poster boy, he lures students to his stall with the Marines Push-Up Challenge.
They have to actually do push-ups, 65 push-ups, they can get whatever they want.
Sergeant Gomez's sales pitch is boosted by his own living example of an Iraq War veteran.
Or they come by, they're like, wow, you've been to Iraq? And he's like, yes. By me speaking to them, it kind of lets them know that, hey, not everybody does come back in a box.
Coming back to Iraq was certainly not on the minds of Marines during their quick march to Baghdad in 2003.
Good morning, Republican Guard for United States Marines. Hoorah!
we joined an artillery battery commanded by Captain Phil Bragg.
We're pretty much overwhelming all their defenses and moving pretty rapidly. Probably about as fast as you can go. I don't think you could go any faster.
Mama, mama, can't you see? Mama, mama, can't you see? What the Marine Corps done for me? What the Marine Corps done for me? Oh, Lordy, don't you know? Oh, Lordy, don't you know?
What you're looking at, what you're sitting in front of, is called the Deployable Virtual Training Environment. Okay,
These days, Major Phil Bragg draws on his Iraq experience,
when you get out there, you can actually do this when you
teaching Marines how to train others in the not always accurate art of artillery warfare.
The virtual battlefield simulator. We try to ensure that we have positive identification of our targets and that we minimize collateral damage. That doesn't mean that sometimes civilians don't get killed. Use these for your range.
Do you spend much time thinking about that?
I don't dwell on it, no.
Bring it on down! 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, no war!
But as the war drags on, many Americans are dwelling on its uncomfortable facts.
Try to straighten out this war!
Civilian casualties were a key point of protest for the few thousand demonstrators who marked the 5th anniversary of the war in Washington.
Instituting torture!
The number killed since 2003 is notoriously disputed. Estimates range from fewer than 100,000 to more than 1 million. Most civilian deaths are now at the hands of other Iraqis.
For the immediate arrest of George W. Bush.
We change rules of engagement more often than we change underwear. And the rules of engagement are held up as this great moral standard for the use of force in Iraq. And at one point it was you can shoot anything that moves after dark.
You're so amazing.
Iraq war veteran Adam Kokesh served 2 tours in Iraq, including during the bloody battles for Fallujah in 2004. Like many Iraq veterans, Kokesh returned with psychological stress.
Today in Iraq, in a situation like that,
He's now a full-time anti-war protester.
if this government will not make peace for us, we will make it for ourselves. You don't hear anymore what I heard when I was going to Iraq, which was that, yeah, I'm going to fight the good fight and enthusiastically risk my life. Now all you hear is, well, I want to come back home. I want to come home alive, not in a box. I want to get my Marines home safe and alive. And that's what the troops are fighting for now. They're not fighting for the mission because they know that it's a load of crap.
As the 5th anniversary of the war passed, the number of American military deaths crossed the 4,000 milestone. At least 50,000 more have been seriously injured. Perhaps it is true of all wars, but as I walked among the gravestones of Iraq's dead at Arlington Cemetery in Washington, I was struck by how young they were. Many of them had been born, lived and died in the time since I left school. At just 36, Major Phil Bragg is among the older generation of Iraq's war veterans.
How's it hanging?
Wait for it, wait for it.
I don't look forward to leaving my family. I don't think anybody does, but I'm definitely ready to go back and get back in the fight, so to speak. And we normally fire at the beginning to destroy and suppress the enemy that they're going up against.
Bragg expects to be deployed again soon, to Iraq or Afghanistan.
I think it's the anxiety beforehand. It's the anxiety of him getting ready to go. That's the hardest part.
I do want a Republican Guard for the United States Marines. Hoorah!
In 2003, Phil Bragg fought alongside Lieutenant Stephen Thompson. Back then, Thompson was a cocky and colourful 25-year-old.
It's kind of old, doesn't it?
Second in command of an artillery battery.
Night vision sights and rickety AK-47s are pretty good, but they're not much help when you got artillery raining down on your head.
Another Marine reporting, sir!
Thompson returned to Iraq in 2004 when the insurgency was reaching its peak. He was no longer an artilleryman, but a platoon commander. It was also when the US began losing most of its forces to the roadside bombs known as IEDs, improvised explosive devices.
April 16th, 2004, I was on a security patrol going from Ramadi to Fallujah. And I remember I looked at my driver, Sergeant Duran, and I saw this big 50-gallon drum with a sign on top of it, and I just hadn't remembered seeing it there before. I'm grabbing the mic, and I'm going to tell all my vehicles to swerve over to the left-hand lane. As I do, I look down at the radio and I look back, and then boom, just this huge percussion. I just remember it being black and some smoke, and then I kind of open my eyes, and I look over at my right arm, and about the time I do, blood just kind of, two nice little spurts across my lap, and I screamed. It's kind of embarrassing to say now, but I screamed, and I was like, ah, you know. Tried to get out of the Humvee, and when I did, I stepped down with my left foot, and my shin just buckled underneath me. And as I rolled over, I kind of looked down at my leg, and it's got this smoke coming out of it. My driver, Sergeant Duran, I remember he took my flak jacket off, my blouse off, and just like this, it's kind of gruesome, I'm sorry, but like this hunk just kind of fell right onto the street. And I'm like, oh my God.
Thompson's lower left leg was shattered, and he lost chunks of muscle from his right arm and back. He was medevaced out of Iraq to Germany and then to the United States.
They put a titanium rod and 4 screws in my shin and in my arm. They cut the lat muscle out, flipped it upside down, and stuffed it into my arm. Bit of a Frankenstein procedure, quite frankly, but it worked, so I got no complaints.
After 7 months of rehabilitation, Thompson returned to active duty and started flight school a year later.
I kind of like being stronger than him in spite of the fact that I'm injured. And it drives you.
That drive got him back on his feet and into the air.
We were smacking.
3.5 years after being wounded, he's back in Iraq, flying attack helicopters. Based at the Al-Taqaidam Air Base, Thompson's missions cover the western province of Al-Anbar, which includes the cities of Ramadi and Fallujah. Al-Anbar was once regarded as being effectively under insurgent control. Now a controversial alliance between US forces and Sunni tribes has achieved what became known as the Al-Anbar Awakening, one of America's few shining examples of peace in Iraq.
If you were here in 04 or 05, you'd probably heard a rocket impact this base already in the time we've been doing this interview. The insurgency was full blown at that time. And yes, it is much better. I'm really not trying to just sell you the party line. It is night and day. It's almost to the point where at times you fight complacency.
When attacks recently peaked again in Basra and Baghdad, Al-Anbar remained quiet. 2 years ago, this squadron's Cobra pilots were scrambling to support several combat missions and 6 medical evacuations every day. Now medivacs are down to 1 a day, and most of them are not combat related. There's only been 2 combat missions in the last 6 months. On this tour at least, gunners are more likely to let loose on a firing range than shoot at insurgents. Captain Thompson's glad just to be off the ground.
It takes a level of sophistication to shoot an aircraft out of the sky. Whereas putting a bomb on the side of the road, I mean, you or I can do. So training's minimal, and they're a lot more prevalent. So you understand that on the ground, and maybe in the air, you're just a little bit more separated from that.
The beaches of Southern California are about as far from Iraq as you can get. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Pete Owen has lived here with his family since leaving the Marine Corps last year. He's now a civilian and a published military historian, paid to teach Marines at a nearby base.
You can read in a history book about collateral damage, about innocent people getting hurt, and you kind of think you know what that's about. But when you're looking into the eyes of a little girl whose feet got blown off, that is just an overwhelming experience, and you can't imagine that. You can't prepare for that anyway but to experience it. And there's no way that you can experience that and feel good about it. I'd have to say that this Iraq war has changed me. And certainly my career goals with the Marine Corps were kind of eroded after the Iraq war. Because I was disheartened by the way it was going, but just because I just kind of lost my zest for that type of life.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah! Semper Fi! Semper Fi! Do or die! Do or die! Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
We first met Pete Owen in 2003, on the day Baghdad fell on April the 9th. We joined a Marines convoy which entered the city that evening under his command.
Stay back!
With retrospect, there's no question I should have done things differently that day. There's no question I should have done things differently that day.
Back up!
Anxious young Marines at the back of the convoy fired warning shots when civilian vehicles got too close.
Stay the fuck back! Back up!
They were convinced one of them was a suicide bomber.
Suddenly, the Marines believe they are also under attack from the side.
Bring that area right there! Give me an ammo can! Hurry up! Clear those trees! See the fucking traces coming?
3 unarmed civilians were killed. That still disturbs Pete Owen.
I think that the Marines were in a situation that we hadn't prepared them for. They felt like they were under threat, and there was a lot happening very quickly. So the survival instinct came out, as we should expect it should come out in that situation.
1, outer, 2, outer, 3, outer, 4, together, 1, 2, 3, 4, United States Marine Corps, Iraq!
Patrick Payne was one of the shooters that Baghdad night. He was just 21. After a second tour of Iraq, Payne left the Marines and now works for a supply company while living with his parents in Claremont, just outside LA.
Being off in a third world country like Iraq is, you know, it just kind of made me grateful to have the things that we have. You know, paved roads, like having a McDonald's on every corner. Like Starbucks, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a Starbucks. They're all over the place, even though I'm not a fan of Starbucks, but they're there, and it's just nice to have them there, even if you don't drink that coffee. You want me to drive it?
Huh? Yeah, I'll let you drive it.
An internal investigation cleared Payne of any wrongdoing in the killing of the 3 civilians.
This is what you need.
5 years later, he has no regrets.
Are you trying to sell it to me? Yeah, if you want to buy it.
I was excited. You know, your adrenaline's pumping, and something just kind of came up real quick.
It does.
You're happy to live through it. You're happy that, you know, all your training is paid off because you reacted the way that you were supposed to. You handled everything right. You know, so it's kind of like, cool. It's almost rewarding. You know, despite the fact that innocent people ended up dying.
Patrick Payne was back in Iraq in 2004. That was the same year exposure of prisoner abuse and torture at Baghdad's Abu Ghraib prison shocked the world perhaps more than any other incident in Iraq. Payne thinks it was excusable.
It was just some people that were bored. You know, they were stuck in a jail guarding people that were locked up in cages, or I should say cells. You know, what else did they have to do? So they entertained themselves.
But don't you think that the human rights of prisoners are important?
There were bags on their heads, right? Nobody knew who they were. But then again, you're in war. I mean, a lot of your standard rules don't always apply. And maybe they shouldn't have piled them up naked like that, you know. But, you know, to get court-martialed for it, I think that's extreme.
So do you support what happened in Abu Ghraib?
I don't support it. I wouldn't go in there and do that myself. But I think... Maybe I shouldn't say what I think. Nah, but I think the only person that should really be punished is the person with the camera. Because that's just stupid to get caught.
For the US military in Iraq, and for America in the eyes of the world, Abu Ghraib was a PR disaster, with direct and deadly consequences.
Even a prisoner, even though he is arrested, is still treated humanely. As a military professional, it makes me sick.
The second I saw him, I was angry because I thought a U.S. Marine will die because of this. And I don't like people doing dumb stuff to make more people shoot at Marines. And that's how I looked at it. I was furious.
The surge in violence was eventually answered with a surge in troops. As elections loom in the United States, the success of the strategy has been limited and its future judged precarious.
Today is going to get you a new board.
I think you did. He did. I heard him say it. I think
Decisions on substantial troop withdrawals will be left to George Bush's successor.
Rocco. I think all Americans want it to end. It's just how we want it to end is the really thing that people are contentious about.
How long that's going to take, I have no idea. I will say that anybody that tries to predict that or tries to put a date on it certainly does not understand the complex environment that's operating over there.
You see anything over there?
You don't know tomorrow when things can change one way or the other.
Lima, Bravo, 7, 2, 3, 8, 2, 6.
This country's been ruled by tribes for thousands of years, so it's bringing tribes and religions together to stay under one nation.
0 to 2, 4, 5.
And once they start accepting each other a little more, I think we can hand it over. But I still think until the infighting goes away, I think it's going to be hard to do.
5 years and counting, the Iraq conflict has outlasted America's involvement in World War II. Most of the Marines we revisited believe the fight in Iraq will last at least 5 years more.
Look this way. Everybody say, oh, and again.
For the Marines, for everyone who served in Iraq, it's going to be a life-defining experience. Whether it changes you or not, it's going to have an impact on how you view the world and how you view yourself as a person. What you don't see veterans doing is sitting around crying in their room, feeling sorry for themselves. They're generally proud of what they've done.
Part of me wants to say, hey, let's wrap it up a little bit. I mean, it's 2008. On the same note, I have friends who passed away in that war, and I don't want it to kind of come back and nothing change at all, you know. And I kind of want to make a difference when we leave, so that way we feel like we were there for a reason and we actually did help and change something.